Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahabushai, Bahasham, Barakahakudash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahabushai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule and teach well. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the Brother Ra'aya with another video. And in this video, I'm going to start it off with a clip from CBS News' YouTube channel titled, Biden, Israel's Prime Minister, vow to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. And the information we're going to see in this clip is just another example of biblical prophecy taking place right before our very eyes, specifically the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat in Joel chapter 3, the War of Armageddon, where all these major heathen nations are going to be gathered down into that Middle Eastern region to fight each other. And as we'll see in this clip, Joe Biden is visiting Israel and has spoken to their prime minister, and he made a very important comment to where he said, hey, if it comes to it, we'll go to force to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. And this plays into Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 20. Therefore, hear the counsel of Yahweh that he had taken against Edom. And the biblical Edomites are known today as these so-called white people. These Americans, the British, these Europeans, the Russians, the South Africans, Australians, and especially those people over in the Holy Land right now calling themselves Israelis. They're not the true people of the book. The true children of Israel are known as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today. Those people over there are also Edomites of the tribe of Amalek. And for the rest of the video, I'll be referring to them as the 1948ers. And his purpose is that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them. And that least of the flock is speaking of those Amalekite Edomites, those 1948ers. They're going to do something to provoke a response from Iran against them, or to create a false flag situation to justify themselves into going to war against Iran. And that least of the flock is going to draw them out, these other nations, into this war. On the side of the state of Israel, the United States of America, and these other NATO nations, and on the side of Iran, Russia, China, and her other allies. And again, this is going to play into the bigger battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon. But let's get into this clip. And in this clip, I'm going to be jumping around a little bit to hit some main points. But before I start it, this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this video, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily. This video is simply for educational purposes.
We've just been listening to Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid and President Biden speaking at an event. Prior to answering some questions, the two leaders signed a declaration addressing Iran's nuclear ambitions, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as other issues, and then they took questions from reporters. So here to discuss what we've just heard is White House reporter Bo Erickson, who is in Jerusalem following the president's trip. So, Bo, President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid signed the declaration just moments ago. One of the main points is the shared interest to end Iran's nuclear ambitions. You heard both men say that at the end of the day, there's very little light between them when it comes to the final purpose, which is to never allow Iran to attain a nuclear weapon. What can you tell us about the declaration, and how might re-entering talks with the Iran nuclear deal, which is what the president said he would like to do, how might that have an impact on Israeli-U.S. relations?
Hi there. It almost seems like this whole trip going to Israel is just trying to get the attention of Iranian leaders and have like a really forceful response to say this is what we are going to do and this is what we are not going to do, because we are getting the most clear kind of lines that Biden has put around the talks with Iran when it comes to nuclear weapons. Then we have his whole presidency. He's really making a lot of news now. Specifically on that declaration, it says that both Israel and the U.S. will do whatever they can to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. We've also heard in the last 24 hours from President Biden in an interview with Israeli TV that he said he would be willing to use force to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. He would be willing to use force to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. He would be willing to use force to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon if it was the last.
President Joe Biden would be willing to use force if that is the only thing that would stop Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. And the United States of America is nothing more than a puppet, a lapdog to the state of Israel. So Israel's going to do something, as it says in Jeremiah 49 verse 20, to provoke some situation to where they think they're justified in going to war against Iran, and the least of the flock is going to draw out these other nations. Again, the United States of America and these other NATO nations in on their side, and on the side of Iran, Russia, and China. And Israel is not going to stop until they overthrow Iran. Just look up something called the Oded-Yinon Plan, which is a plan that the 1948ers set up to balkanize the Middle East and make all those other nations weak compared to the state of Israel, so they would be the only hegemon, the strongest nation in that region. And remember, you had General Wesley Clark say that the United States had a military plan to knock over several Middle Eastern countries, and the top nation on that plan was Iran.
Resort. And that really surprised me, because President Biden is kind of cautious on saying he will use the military, but here he says that if it's a last resort, he would use it to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
I want to ask you.
Now, real quick, I'm going to play another clip from Wyon's YouTube channel titled Gravitas, Biden will use force against Iran if needed. And again, this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this video, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily. This video is simply for educational purposes. And I'm going to start this clip at the 1 minute and 21 second mark.
But Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid wants the US to go beyond words. He met Joe Biden one-on-one today. At the press conference, Lapid lectured the US president.
Words will not stop them, Mr. President. Diplomacy will not stop them. The only thing that will stop Iran is knowing that if they continue to develop their nuclear program, the free world will use force. The only way to stop them is to put a credible military threat on the table.
To pacify Israel,
the only way to stop them is to use force. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them. And remember just recently that those 1948ers ran a major military drill called Chariots of Fire, where they had all branches of their military participate, and it involved simulated attacks against Iran and their proxies. Hey, the drums of war are starting to beat louder and louder as we get closer and closer to these prophecies coming to their fulfillment. But now I'm going to go back to the clip from CBS News and jump to the 10 minute and 52 second mark, which is dealing with U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia also plays an important part in prophecy.
With the Crown Prince and the King. There are a lot of issues at stake. You heard him say it. The idea here is to maintain U.S. supremacy and involvement in this region, because if they aren't the lead sort of...
Biden is traveling to Saudi Arabia to meet with their leaders so he can keep the U.S. in maintaining a strong position in the Middle East. through Saudi Arabia, because as you know, through the petrodollar system where Saudi Arabia sells its oil in US dollars, that's allowed the US dollar to remain king amongst these currencies. And if that system were to fall apart, that would be a massive detrimental blow to the US dollar.
Broker state, it's going to be Russia, it's going to be China.
Let's back
Russia
that up a
certainly
little
has
bit.
interest in this region, given, and if he isn't bringing it up.
And the US is worried about Russia and China and these other nations coming in and making deals with Saudi Arabia, pulling them more towards their sphere, which just recently the BRICS nations have been courting Saudi Arabia to join them. And also, word around the campfire is that Saudi Arabia is losing a lot. It's getting low on its oil reserves, and they're actually receiving oil from Russia, which would be a very strategic, geopolitical, and economic ties to be built up between Saudi Arabia and Russia, which would further pull them out of the United States of America's sphere. And remember that Russia is a part of OPEC Plus.
Then why is he saying it here and not vowing to explicitly bring up that issue with the Crown Prince and the King? There are a lot of issues at stake. You heard him say it. The idea here is to maintain U.S. supremacy and involvement in this region, because if they aren't the lead sort of broker state, it's going to be Russia, it's going to be China. Russia certainly has interest in this region, given its involvement and its engagement in Syria and dealing with the aftermath of the civil war that continues. Putin's going to be in Tehran next week to talk about Syria and some other related issues.
Putin's going to be in Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, next week to talk about some serious issues. And like I said, like I've been saying throughout the video, when the U.S. and those other NATO nations come against Iran on the side of Israel, nations like Russia are going to come in on the side of Iran, which is also a part of biblical prophecy. But as you just saw, the U.S. is trying to heavily maintain strong ties with Saudi Arabia in that Middle Eastern region. And that's the Most High keeping the United States tied down in that Middle Eastern region so they can take part in the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon. This is Joel chapter 2, verse 20. But I will remove far off from you the Northern Army, the North American Army, the United States military, all branches, the Army, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, etc., etc. And the U.S. already has a military presence in Iraq and Syria, and they've used Saudi Arabia as a major military stepping off point for some of their wars in the Middle East. And I will drive him into a land barren and desolate, that Middle Eastern region, more specifically Saudi Arabia, which is going to be the main staging ground for this battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, with his face toward the East Sea. And when we go to a map of the Middle East, here you see Saudi Arabia, and towards the east, what do you have? The Persian Gulf, and above that, Iran, the main target of the U.S. and the state of Israel in that Middle Eastern region. And to the northeast, you have the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the U.S. also has a somewhat of a military presence in Iraq. And his hinder part toward the utmost sea, or behind him, the Red Sea. And his stink shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he had done great things. For all these heathen militaries that are going to be gathered down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat for this War of Armageddon, there's going to be a great slaughter, especially of United States military personnel. Hey, to any of you that may come across this video and end up finding yourself in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, you better come to terms with that being your final resting place. And also, as that guy said in that clip, Putin was visiting Tehran next week over some issues. And again, like I've been saying, when the state of Israel and the U.S. and their other allies go against Iran, Russia is going to come in on the side of Iran. This is Ezekiel chapter 38. I'm going to start at verse 1. And the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, which is the biblical name for Russia, And besides being known as Gog in Ezekiel chapter 38, Russia is also known as the North Country in Jeremiah 50 verse 9, as well as the spiritual Medes in Isaiah chapter 13, I believe around verse 17, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws. And that's the Most High putting those Russian Edomites back in that old confrontational Soviet Union spirit. And we can clearly see that with their military operation in Ukraine and them constantly making threats to the West, telling them that if you keep getting in our business, don't be surprised if we use nukes on you. And then I believe you had the president of Belarus say recently that Russia and Belarus coming back to one will rebuild that old Soviet Union pact, the Soviet Union empire. And I will bring thee forth and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Russia or Gog's military hardware, soldiers, tanks, fighter jets, artillery pieces, the S-300, the S-400 being gathered down into that Middle Eastern region. And Russia also has a military presence in Syria right now due to their involvement in the Syrian civil war. And also Russia has been courting the country of Sudan to build up military and economic ties with them. And when we go back to this map of the Middle East, at that hinder part with the Red Sea, what's next to it? Sudan. And also Egypt has become a middleman for Russian oil getting to Saudi Arabia. You see that not only is the United States of America getting further tied down into this Middle Eastern region, but Russia as well to fulfill biblical prophecy. Here's the main point in verse 5. Persia, which is the ancient name for Iran, Ethiopia and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer, which is speaking of Turkey and all his bands, because even though recently you had Turkey make concessions to NATO to allow Sweden and Finland to join, ultimately they're going to completely turn against NATO and ally themselves with Russia. The house of Togramad, the North Quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard, a protector unto them. Be thou an ally to nations like Iran. So again, when the least of the flock shall draw all these heathen nations down into the valley of Jehoshaphat for that war of Armageddon, Gog or Russia is going to come in on the side of Persia, Iran.
And there's the concern, of course, about China, which has great investment in this region as well, especially in the infrastructure realm. So if he has to go to Saudi Arabia and meet with the king and meet with the crown prince and try to keep them engaged on issues like Iran, on issues like the price of oil, how awkward might it be to bring that up when he has said what he has said before? You know, we'll wait and see. Our hope is certainly that we get some sense of that in the meetings afterward, not only from American officials, but hopefully from Saudi officials, who may be able to give us some sense of how it came up and what the response was. We'll wait and see. The president gets there Friday. He's going to meet with them, with the royal family late Friday night, ahead of meetings with those other Gulf nations that the president referenced, primarily on Saturday as part of a big regional conference they're holding. As the White House has tried to frame this, he's merely stopping by a conference that Saudi Arabia is holding, and will meet with Saudi.
That's it with that clip. You get the point. Hey, but if you've got that spiritual eyesight, you can clearly see that these end times biblical prophecies are taking place right before our very eyes. But now I'm going to close it out in Joel chapter 3. I'm going to start at verse 9. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, the heathen Gentiles, the Edomites of the so-called white people, the Ishmaelites of the so-called Arabs, the Moabites of the so-called Chinese, the Elamites of the so-called East Indians, etc., etc. Prepare war with Iran, the battle in the valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon, World War III, nuclear war, because it will go nuclear, and the men of the Lord, the prophets of the Most High, chiefly through GMS or Great Millstone, are proclaiming this among you heathens to prepare for war by going out onto the highways and byways preaching this word, as well as putting up video epistles on the internet. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. These heathen nations as militaries being gathered down into that Middle Eastern region. But I will remove far off from you the northern army into a land barren and desolate, the state of Israel conducting the chariots of fire military drill, and Russia having a military presence in nations like Syria. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen. The United States of America, the state of Israel, Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, these NATO nations, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh, and those mighty ones are the death angels of Yahweh Bahashem Yahawashi, holding back this great destruction, waiting to get the go-ahead to release it, which is mainly going to happen after the Charagma, the Markofthebeast in Revelation 13, verses 16 to 18 is mandatorily implemented. And that Charagma is, of course, the RFID/NFC, MICROCHIPIMPLANT. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which in the Hebrew is Yahweh's Shaphat, or Yahweh's judgment. For there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. And the reason the Most High is gathering down these heathen nations into the valley of Jehoshaphat is to judge them for afflicting the apple of his eye, the true children of Israel, who are again known as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today. And you can go up to the beginning of this chapter, to read about that. And at the top of that list of the heathen nations that have come against the children of Israel are you Edomites, as pursuant to Psalms chapter 83. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. And when we see political moves being made, like what we saw in those clips from Wyon and CBS News, it just goes to show us that the day of Yahweh is very near in the valley of decision. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong. As we can clearly see, we're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.